Hello everybody, welcome along. This is the David Attenborough reading. We're now on to part 9 of our recordings, so we'll get going very shortly. As a quick recap, at the end of the last one they've just moved into an area of jungle to do a bit of filming, and specifically some of the Amerindians that were with them were asking what they'd want for their tea, and they named a specific bird and off they went to try and shoot this specific bird. So let's see whether they had any success before they continue their adventures in the jungle. "Very well," said Kenneth, now he was one of the Amerindians, confidently, and disappeared into the forest. An hour later he returned with a large fat marm, just as he had promised. I asked how he was able to find just the bird for which we had asked, and he told me that all Amerindians hunt by imitating bird calls, so like copying the noises. We had decided on marm, so he had gone into the forest and, moving stealthily, imitated the call of the marm, which is a low, long whistle. After 30 minutes a bird had replied. Calling continuously, he had crept closer and closer and had finally shot it. After supper we climbed into our hammocks and settled down for our first night in the forest. Our fortnight on the savannas had taught us something of the technique of hammock sleeping, but on the savannas it had been hot throughout the nights as well as the day, but here, high in the Mazaruni base, the nights were very cold. I learnt that night that a hammock sleeper should take with him twice as many blankets as he would normally use in a bed, for he has to wrap himself below as well as above, and the efficiency of a single blanket is thereby divided in two. It was so cold that, after an hour, I had to climb out of my hammock and put on all the spare clothes I had brought with me before I could get to sleep. Even so, I passed a bad night. I woke well before dawn, but as the sun rose, I was amply rewarded, for the calls of the macaws and the parrots echoed over the river, and a hummingbird was already feeding on the blossoms of a creeper which hung down by the water's edge. It was a tiny, bejewelled creature, no bigger than a walnut, moving jerkily through the air. When it decided to feed from a flower, it hovered in front of it, flashing out its long, thread-like tongue and sipping the nectar from the depths of the flower. What I'll just do is pause there and say, maybe after this one, this reading, go onto YouTube, and actually if you Google, search for hummingbird on YouTube, and actually look out for some slow motion of hummingbirds. They've got I think they flap their wings faster than any other bird on the planet. I think they've got a really fast heartbeat as well from memory. But look up a hummingbird. It's an amazing bird, especially the way they stick their tongues out of their long beaks. That's worth watching. So this is the hummingbird. When it finished, it slowly reversed through the air on its rapidly beating wings and shot away in search of another blossom. After breakfast, King George told us that the paintings Bill Seger had mentioned lay 2 hours' march away in the forest. These are cave paintings he was talking about. Excuse me while I get myself in position. Here we go. We asked him if he could lead us to them. He said that he had only been there once before, but he was sure that he could find them again. With another of the Akaweos to help carry our cameras, he led us off into the bush. He went ahead unhesitatingly, cutting notches in the trees and bending over the heads of saplings to mark the route so that we should not lose our way back. We were now in high tropical rainforest. The great trees rose 200 feet above us, most of them covered in plants, which have the peculiar habit of not growing in earth, but sending down long aerial roots to draw nourishment from the humid air. Occasionally, on the forest floor, we came across a wide area scattered thickly with fallen, yellow blossoms, which made a carpet of colour in the gloomy forest. We looked up to see where they had come from, but all the trees rose so high above us that if it had not been for the fallen flowers, we might never have guessed that any of them flowered at all. In between the boles of the trees there was a tangle of small saplings and creepers through which we had to cut a passage with our knives. We never saw a large animal, but we were well aware of the presence of innumerable tiny creatures around us, for the air was filled with the chirps and pipings of frogs, crickets, and other insects. After 2 hours' hard going, both Charles and I were very tired indeed. It was hot and muggy, and we were soaked in sweat and very thirsty. We had not seen any water to drink since we left the river. And then, suddenly, we came upon the cliff for which we had been searching. It rose vertically for several hundred feet and broke through the forest canopy, the shade of which had hitherto kept us in sweltering twilight. The rocks and branches did not meet, and through the gap Between them, a shaft of sunlight struck diagonally down onto the white quartized rock of the cliff, floodlighting the red and black paintings which the rock was smothered. The sight was so impressive and so starting, the weariness dropped from us and we raced excitedly to the foot of the cliff. So just to recap then, we're talking about cliff paintings and also cave paintings, and it's likely that they are probably some of the first Europeans ever to see this. It's so remote, and this is the 1950s where it was definitely harder to get to these places. The paintings stretched for 40 or 50 yards along its base and rose to a height of 30 or 40 feet. The designs were crude, which means very basic, but many of them clearly represented animals. There were several groups of birds, probably marm, which Kenneth had hunted for us the previous evening, and many indeterminate quadrupeds, so quad meaning four, so four-legged animals. One seemed to us to be an armadillo, but then, if we regarded the armadillo's head as a tail, the design became equally clearly a representation of an anteater. Another creature lay upside down, its feet in the air. At first we thought that this might represent a dead beast, but then we saw that it had 2 claws on its forelegs and 3 on its hind, the number possessed by the 2-toed sloth. Above it, to corroborate our identification, was a thick red line, obviously the branch on which the sloth should hang, but which perhaps represented difficulties in drawing to the unknown artist, who therefore painted it separately to the creature, to make his meaning clear. Among the animals were boldly painted symbols, squares, zigzags, and strings of lozenges, which is like sort of tablet-shaped, the meaning of which we could not begin to guess at. Most moving and evocative of all, interspersed between the animals and symbols, were hundreds of handprints. On the higher parts of the cliff they were in groups of 6 or 8, but near the base they were so numerous that they had been superimposed one upon the other to form almost solid areas of red paint. I placed my hand over several of them and found them all to be smaller than mine. At my request, King George made the same comparison. The prince fitted his hands exactly. I asked King George if he could tell us what the paintings represented. Sorry, I'm running out of room here. What the paintings represented, but though he willingly made several wild suggestions for each animal we pointed to, his identifications were obviously just as tentative as ours. If we made alternative suggestions, he agreed and laughed and confessed he did not know. But one design we all agreed upon. "What's that?" I asked him. Now before we do, let's have a quick look. So can you see there? Handprints, so this is the handprints he was just describing, and you might even be able to make out some of the animals being painted there as well, or some of the symbols and zigzags and that. And then further down here, as it says there, animal designs, perhaps a sloth and a giant anteater. So that's what he was talking about. Look, that's like the head, there's the feet dangling down, and there's the body, and that is like obviously the stick there. And that's what he's saying. That looks like the head of an anteater, or it could be the tail of an armadillo. But absolutely staggering. I don't know if they're going to have a guess in a minute, but how many thousands of years old these paintings might be. Pointing to the outline of an upright human figure, which was very obviously male. King George was convulsed with laughter. "He's sporting," he said with a wide grin. King George was most emphatic that he knew neither the significance nor the origin of the paintings. They made long time ago, he explained, but not by Akawire men. We found evidence of their antiquity, for here and there part of the hard rock had flaked away, taking with it a section of the paintings. The resultant scars were no longer fresh, but had weathered to the same shade as the rest of the cliff, a process which must have taken a great many years, meaning that those paintings are very old. Their purpose, whatever it was, must have been important one, for to place the design so high on the cliffs, the artist must have gone to the labour of building special ladders. Perhaps the paintings were part of a magical ceremony connected with hunting, the man drawing the animal he desired and then registering his identity by leaving his handprint. Yet only one of the creatures, a bird, was shown as being dead, and none appeared as being wounded, as they seemed to be in the Paleolithic paintings caves of France. Now that's something that's also worth looking up as well. There are lots of famous cave paintings in France, some of the oldest ones in the world as well. For an hour, Charles and I photographed the designs, building a crude ladder from saplings to enable us to reach the higher ones. My thirst became overpowering, and as I came down the ladder for the last time, I noticed that water was dripping from the top of the overhanging cliff onto a boulder which was covered in thick, sodden moss. I hurried to the spot, squeezed lumps of the moss, and moistened my mouth with the gritty, dark brown water. Whoa, that doesn't sound very nice, does it? Seeing me do this, King George disappeared among the cliffs to the left, and within 5 minutes returned to say that he had discovered water. I followed him, clambering over the huge boulders that littered the base of the cliff. 100 yards to the left, a wide crack ran down the cliff face. As it approached the ground, it broadened and deepened into a small cave, the floor of which was formed by a deep black pool of water. In the back of the grotto, a vigorous stream of water tumbled into the pool, but the pool had no visible outlet, so I know you can't see that. It presented such a startling appearance. This torrent sprouting from the living rock and pouring into a seemingly bottomless pool which never overflowed, that for the moment I forgot my thirst. Surely such a pool could, to primitive minds, invest the cliff with a magical character. I remembered the grottos of ancient Greece into which sacrificial objects had been thrown to appease the gods, and plunged my arm into the water in the hopes of finding a stone axe head. But the pool was so deep that I could only touch the bottom in the shallower part, and there I found only gravel. I tested the pool with a stick and found it to be over 5 feet deep. So what's 5 feet? That's about 1.5 meters, bit more. And there's a bit more. I will look at the picture properly in a second. Let's just read the end. My thirst quenched, I returned to the cliffs to tell Charles of the discovery. We sat and speculated as to what the paintings might mean and whether the grotto had any connection with them. By now the sun had disappeared over the crest of the cliff, and the paintings had lost their theatrical lighting. If we were to regain camp that night, we should have to start back immediately. And let's have a quick look. So there you go, the spring at the bottom of the cliff. So maybe not completely clear, but you've actually just got this water coming out of nowhere and disappearing at the bottom of the rock. And that's what he was saying. It would have been probably quite special to primitive people who had maybe little understanding. But there you go. The next reading of David Attenborough done then. Hopefully you enjoyed that. The next chapter is entitled Sloths and Snakes. Now do remember what I said, which is maybe go off and have a look at some video of hummingbirds. That's probably quite beautiful to watch, and there's some absolutely staggeringly beautiful colours on hummingbirds as well. In the meantime, thanks for watching and hope to see you soon. Bye bye.